I'm Shauna.
I'm Sarah.
I'm Haley.
I'm Tyler.
I'm Jennifer.
And welcome to Cereal Talk, where you get to see real talk and green drink. Every episode we have one that's not cereal. In a granola bar, muesli. I can't remember what else, but it's been really interesting to see what people eat for breakfast. That's not cereal.
Yeah, I think oatmeal was the other week.
Oatmeal. You're right.
yeah.
You're right. Well, welcome back to another episode of Cereal Talk. We are really excited for this conversation. We've had a crazy season so far of really great conversations. I know this one won't disappoint, but we are going to kind of dive into the world of being a mom or choosing not to be a mom and all that comes with, both from society and also from the church, and what that means for the women on this call. And we are excited. This is going to be a challenging conversation, I think, but it's one that needs to be had. So we are not shying away. So we're going to dive right in. But first, we're going to start with introductions. You all know me, but I just want to, in relation to motherhood, I want to kind of share. I am married, but I have no children. So that will be my perspective for this call, but I will open up the floor to the rest of our participants.
I'm Haley Apple. I have been at North Atlanta for about 5.5 years now with my husband, Jonathan. We have 2 children, both through adoption. We have our daughter is almost 3 and our son is 4 months old. And so that's the perspective I'm coming from.
I'm Tyler Smith. I've been in North Atlanta, I don't know, 17, 18 years. I have a daughter. She just turned 7. And I am single, 27 still, 28. And so that's my perspective. Single mom with a now elementary age kid.
And I'm Jennifer Schroeder. I've been at North Atlanta now for right at 5 years. I have 4 kids. My husband and I have 4 kids, a son who's about to turn 9 and triplets who are 7. And I'm kind of representing one of the voices of the working mom, full-time working mom.
And I matched Jennifer's children. However, I think she had it harder because she had triplets and I had 4 separate births. So I have 4 children, ages 9, 8, 5, and 3. And I am also a full-time working mom.
Well, thank you all and welcome. And Tyler, I never know how old I am ever. When one of the Christmas gifts that we gave out to one of our family members is a calendar, and it had my age in it, and I was like, wait, what? I didn't know I was that old. In my head, I'm still like 30, and that's just in my mind. Anyway, so let's just dive into this conversation because I think we're going to have a lot to talk about. So let's not extend the introduction any longer. So let's talk about the journey into having or not having kids and what that looked like. How was that decision made, and were you influenced negatively or positively? What has happened in the aftermath of that was negative or positive? We're kind of thinking around the role, like gender role conversation of, did you feel pressure? Was there judgment? Were you fully accepted? It doesn't have to be just a negative perspective. Like, what was your experience in the journey to motherhood and then the journey through motherhood? I know no one's out of it yet. No one's got kids that are graduated and gone, but what has that looked like for you?
So I should add, I am a stay-at-home parent. So that's another part of what my journey is at the moment. So in terms of being influenced by gender roles, some of that's hard to unpack because it's our environment, it's what we grow up in, what we see, what we experience. I think I always assumed if, like, at some point I'd get married and I'd want kids, I'd want a family. And Jonathan and I got married when I was 29, he was 34. We weren't in a hurry to have kids, but a unique part of our story is just that Jonathan always wanted to adopt. And I loved that idea, and I never really needed to have my own like biological children. And so we just kind of jumped in and went for that. That's its own process, conversation. Adoption is probably a whole other conversation for another day. But yeah, as far as how gender roles really goes into that, I don't know that I thought much about it, except that I just sort of always assumed that having kids would be a great interrupter in my life. In the sense that I have a theater degree. I had done some graduate work in theology and art, worked in ministry in some different capacities. And I think I always just assumed like you have kids and things stop. Probably because, my mother was a stay-at-home parent. I think I've had this idea that maybe I needed to stay home, at least in the early years. And yeah, the interesting question about that is I'm not sure Jonathan ever thought of it that way as a male. I'm not sure. I would be curious how many men think of children as something that shifts your identity, shifts your trajectory, changes what you're doing. And I mean, that has proven to be true for me in a lot of ways. So that's something, it has been a complete identity shift. Putting the pieces of identity back together for me is a process I'm still doing, because I have been staying home for almost 3 years. More on that probably as we go, but yeah, that's that gender specific piece that kind of sticks out to me about my thought process and my journey.
Well, gender roles for me, I guess, was I influenced by them? Yeah. I guess, well, first and foremost, this is gonna sound kind of ridiculous because I have a child now, but I think I was about 5 when I learned where babies came from and how they were born, and I was like, no, like I don't want that in my body. Like I'm not about that. Like definitely don't. I was intrigued by the idea of being a mom, I guess, because I had come to the conclusion that I would think about adopting or think about having a child a different way. I wasn't necessarily sure I wanted a baby, because my 5-year-old perspective was I watched my mom, who had just had my little brother, and I was like, she's at home. She gets to do what we want to do, and mommies don't get to do what they want to do. And I don't want to be a mommy. So that's that. Like, and that was pretty much my perspective for a long time. I mean, at one point in time, I went to the doctor and I was like, I know I don't want to be a mom. So, tie my tubes, never want to do this. And they told me no. Like, they told me straight up no. And I was like, but I don't want to do it. Like, they're like, oh no, you're too young, not the right age. Like, you don't even have any kids yet. So you got to at least have some kids or be a particular age or, have some type of health issue in order to decide that you don't want to have kids. And I was just like, all right, cool, I guess. Which was odd for me because I was about 19 at that point. But at 5, I decided. And, so at 19, I was like, all right, it's time. Like, won't have to worry about it. So I guess that's like the biggest gender role that kind of, for me, was that I didn't really have a choice whether I got to decide or not what I wanted to do. I always knew I'd never want to be a stay-at-home mom. Like, absolutely never want to do that. I love being at home with my kid, but I am not the one to just like, my whole life is now your whole life. I always knew I needed that separation, that space. So I always knew I'd be a working mom. Like, but yeah, I guess that the deciding factor that you are a woman, and so a mother is what you will be, was kind of like the biggest gender role for me.
So I think what's interesting to me in listening to both Haley and Tyler talk is I hear bits of my story in both of their stories. And I think a lot of people can hear that same sort of thing. You know, I got married a little bit later. I was 35 when I got married. And I knew I wanted to be a mom, but I also remember us having the conversation in our premarital counseling that, you know, my identity is my calling, it's my ministry, it's the work I do, and that was going to always be just a prevalent part of who I was. And so Greg and I talked about it, and we both had no issues with, you know, this idea that I'm going to continue working and all of that. But because I was a little bit older, we started working toward having kids fairly early on, just to make sure we could. And so once we had our kids or started having kids, I remember the biggest kind of pushback I got with regards to gender role was this idea of, you mean you're not going to stay home? I mean, and I get it a lot, I hate to say, from people within the church, both male and female. And the other interesting part of our story is my husband assumes that stay-at-home parent role for our family. And that was the decision we made. And that works for us. And, you know, because I really believe each individual and each family has to figure out what works for where they are within their lives and what their needs are, and where they want to kind of shape their family. And so that was what we chose. We chose for Greg to be that. But the biggest pushback I still have always gotten on that is from people that I go to church with. There is somebody I still to this day pass regularly. I'm not going to name who or when I see this person, but who regularly asks me, well, so has Greg found a job yet? And I say, well, Greg has a job. We have 4 kids. He is doing a lot, and he is making sure they're getting to where they need to be and their needs are being met, and all of those vital, crucial components, so that then I'm also able to do this. And so I think we, the general we, environment, culture, struggles with this idea of recognizing that everybody's parental role can look different, and there is value in each choice that is being made. And so I feel like, you know, one of the reasons this is so important to talk about is because it was a long time after I say a long time after I had kids. I realized my oldest is just about to turn 9, that I kind of was able to relinquish that guilt at choosing to work, choosing to have our family look different, because I was getting so much kind of negative conversations regarding that. And so I think it's important for us to talk about, so that everybody, regardless of their situation, at least has the opportunity to start envisioning, what does their choice look like? And that could be the choice to have kids or to not have kids, the choice to work or to not work, to be the stay-at-home parent or to not, you know, all of those things. And too often, especially in our faith tradition, we tend to make this assumption of, this is what a mom does or looks like, or this is what her role ends up being, and only offering value in that. And that's not meant to diminish anybody who chooses a more traditional path. It's meant to just say, we need to give value to each and every path that's chosen, and free people up to kind of relinquish guilt when they choose a path that may seem a little atypical.
It's very interesting that about the job thing, because I can't imagine somebody saying that about a stay-at-home mom. Like, well, when were they going to get a job? Are they going to get a job yet? And a little bit, that's kind of where my perspective comes in terms of gender roles and the disruption. I think Haley, you talked about the disruption, is why we haven't had kids yet. And that, for me, is because I feel like my career is the one that's on the line, because there is no societal disruption for men. And we've talked about this several episodes now, where, and it's not to say that men aren't being harmed by that, because we've talked about how the assumption is they're not going to be a part of the child's life, or they're not going to know what to do. Like, they can't stay home with the children by themselves. They're not going to get fed. They won't have their hair done. Or like when they walk out of the house disheveled, and it's like, well, where's the mom? Why did the dad dress them today? And just like this assumption that they are incapable. And that's not healthy for them either. So, we say this every episode. It's for everyone. These conversations are just equality for everyone, so you can choose, like Jennifer said, what you want to do. But that disruption piece really resonated with me, Haley, because that's how I feel. Is there is no coming back, and that feels like career suicide to a certain extent. And no one has really made me feel that way at work, or it's just the way my job is structured. Like, the credentials you have to hit, it's just easier to do when you don't have kids, because it just like gets harder. And so it feels like I don't have a choice until I can finally get my career in a place. And that's a balance. That's so challenging. But that's, no one cares about that, right? Like, why? It's time. Why don't you have kids? I don't care about these other excuses you have. Like, according to my clock, with the math of how old you are, how long you've been married, and whatever, the calculation is saying you need to have at least 3.5 children by now. It's just, but that's only on me. That pressure is only on me. And there, I think, is a lot of confusion a lot of times around why, there isn't, why we don't have kids, but why there isn't more discontentment in that, I guess. Like, anyway, I'm getting down kind of a rabbit hole here, but it does feel very different for us and my husband, and for me, to have these conversations. We're on the same page and we're content, but it's like the conversation for him doesn't necessarily include his job. The conversation for me is all about my career and where it's going or where it can't go.
This is really interesting. Because just like Jennifer said, I can hear little nuggets from my own life in everyone's stories. I always assumed I would have children. It wasn't really, a well thought out plan. I just figured at some point I would have kids. And when I got married, we'd been married for a couple of years, and my husband was kind of like, so what's up with that family? And I was kind of good at that point in my life. Like, I wasn't really ready for children. I didn't know if it would be a disruption necessarily, to Haley's point, but I knew that my life would change drastically. So we started trying, and I figured it would take some time, and it did not. So like we started the family a lot faster than I expected. And I think I got that comment, Jennifer, from church a little bit and from work a little bit, kind of like oh, okay, how's this going to affect your career? Are you going to stay home with the kids? And I never for one day thought about staying home. Like, it was always like, let me find a good daycare so I can get back to work. Because like Tyler said, I needed that separation, and I needed to be Sarah. And then when I walked through the daycare, that's when that identity shift came. Now I'm Cameron's mom. Now I'm Danielle's mom. Oh, Bedford's mom is here. But at least, from 8 to 6 or so, I had that time where it was me and what I was used to doing and what I was used to focusing on. So I enjoyed that about remaining a working mother. The main pushback I got really was when I decided to have my 4th child, because I think people thought that was too many kids for a working woman to have. And I was a little taken aback by it, because I was like, look, this is the choice I want to make. I'm pretty sure I can balance the two, and I'll have to figure it out. But I felt like somebody was missing from our family. And I think that was the hardest conversation to have with people, was like explaining why I wanted to have a fourth child. It was like, the same way people are asking, when are you going to start a family? How, those same kind of questions about how they're planning your life for you. I got about the size of my family, which I found really interesting. So I think gender roles have always been there, and they've always been in the background, but I try not to pay as much attention to them. I guess I'm a rebel in that sense.
My heart grew like 3 sizes when you said someone was missing from your family, knowing it was Aaron. He was missing. But I think, kind of to your point, I feel like, and this, I think we probably all relate to this, which I think is part of the problem, right? Is the guilt. And I feel like I have pre-guilt knowing that I want to be a working mom. So I'm already feeling like, well, I have all these career aspirations. So let me get these out of the way before I become a mom, because that's irresponsible of me to like try to do both. And then I feel post-guilt to my current self who wants to be a working mom. Well, what if I have a child and want to stay home? And then I'll feel like, what was I working for the past 7 years of like getting on these serial talks and telling people that I want to be a working mom and I don't have kids yet, and like women's empowerment or whatever, and then I want to stay home. So there's just like, it's so, I say this every episode, heavy and complicated. And I just wish there was more freedom to just be who you want to be and be an individual and not have to fit this mold and this box and this is what is expected of you. And we've talked about this a lot, where it's easier, right? Like if everyone in society has a role and we define it and everyone does their job, then we as a society can function. And I think one of our episodes we talked about how, well, actually society won't just fall apart if people decide to like break out of that mold. Like we'll still be okay. And so just navigating our way through all this murkiness of, it's gonna be okay. We just let people kind of freely do what they want, but that is just so far from how it feels. And it's just really heavy to have to carry the expectations of, for me, the expectations of my future self, the expectations of my current self, the expectations of society, the expectations of family and friends and all this other stuff. And I don't think that this is unique to just this conversation. I mean, this is in everything, but it's just hard.
Well, and I think Haley a little bit hit the nail on the head when she said, I don't think this is something that Jonathan ever thought about. It's just kind of this assumed, and the only way it doesn't occur in somewhat of an assumed fashion is if somebody, sits down and makes a consciously different decision. One of the things that's really struck me in all of this that we do, we frame a lot of the way we say things differently in our household, because, the kids realize that it's a little more unusual for Greg to be the stay-at-home parent, and so there's sometimes, there's those natural socialization components that come into play. And I still remember, I guess I'm digressing slightly. So what I was going to say is, we really try to shape the way we say things differently, instead of kind of naturally gravitating toward assumed gender roles. We say, well, we're choosing for daddy to do this and we're choosing for mommy to do this, or, trying to frame it that way rather than, well, boys do this and girls do that, because that becomes a much more limiting and harmful conversation for people to have when we make these assumptions based on your gender rather than based on who you are. And so I still remember, and I think I may have told a couple of you this story before, I still remember us driving down the road one day, and I don't know what we're talking about, but Harvey, one of my boys, says, well, because girls are fragile. And like my husband slams on the brake. You're like, wait, what? Where did you get that? Because that's certainly not coming out of our mouths. And so I say that to say, one of the important elements of any of these conversations that you guys have had throughout all of this serial talk is this idea of being so intentional with your language and your speech, because kids are going to pick these things up from various sources, and to make it so that it's not just the women thinking about, well, I'm going to stay home or am I not? Am I going to work or am I not? Am I going to have kids or am I not? It becomes an everybody conversation where both genders equally enter into the conversation together, because there's a sense of, I think, empowerment that comes from teaching both our sons and our daughters of the value in being a parent, or the value in choosing not to be a parent, or the value in working, or the value in staying home, that we don't have to ascribe to these assumed roles in order to be a valued and valid part of God's kingdom.
Or ascribe to what they mean, like our assumptions of what they are, or that they have to be permanent. Because I think this is, I don't know what this is going to sound like, but when I wasn't originally, I actually thought I would work part-time when Amina was born. I was like, I'm going to keep working. And I'll just kind of figure that out. And when I decided when I decided to stop and stay home for a while, there was some grief in that for me, right? So it's not like there was some joy in it. There was some grief in it, right? Like two things can be true at the same time. And when we make a decision like that, like everybody doesn't make a decision from the same place, right? I had people who really wanted to celebrate that with me, and that didn't feel good to me. In the sense that like, oh, you're staying home. That's so great. And I was like, yeah, and hard. It's so, we kind of, I think someone just said this, but we kind of want to put a label on it. Like, okay, you're in this category or you're in that category. And I'm still like, for me, it's like, this is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Still, maybe not everybody feels that way. And I was super offended for Greg when somebody asked, like, when's he going to find a job? I was like, has one, hardest thing ever. But these decisions and these choices are so much more fluid and evolving. And like you said, Jennifer, so I think, in real time, at least for us, thankfully, it was not so much about, oh, so you're the wife, the mom, you're going to stay home. It's like, what do we need to do with this situation? What's going to work for us? What's going to work for our kids? And also we have the added aspect of, we are adoptive parents. We did transracial adoption. We are white parents to 2 Black children. So our role as parents is also more involved than if we were raising white children. We have a learning process, a growth process, a lot of work we do around that. That's also mixed in and involved in our parenting. But that being said, like, that's also true for everyone in the sense that, like, every kid is unique, every person is unique. How you need to parent how you need to structure that for your family, how you need to structure that for your children is going to depend a lot on who you are and on who your kids are. And yeah, so.
Yeah, I know we were talking about like roles and like the woman's role and the men's role. And I kind of fit into a different role. I was young, so I was 20. I turned 22 right after I had Charlotte. So young, hadn't finished school yet. So it was just assumed that, like, oh, either she'll give that baby away, or like, I guess this is just gonna be her life for forever. Like, she's just gonna stay right here. Like, what else can she do alone? So it's always a thing. Like, I've had job interviews where I've hidden the fact that I have a child. I just say nothing about it until afterwards, because I need you to give me this job and not assume something about me. Or even the fact that I'm not married. I mean, the entire time I was pregnant, up until this day, there are people who still are like, so when are you going to find that husband? When are you going to get married and start popping out some more babies? And I'm like, I don't even want to be married. Like, that's not where I'm at right now. So there's other roles too. Like I'm kind of fulfill both sides of my family. Not to say that her father is not active. They have a great relationship. They love each other. They spend tons and tons of time together. We spend lots of family time together to give her that family unit that she should have, that she needs to grow into who she'll be. But it is an odd role to be the one that gets called and it's like, oh, gotta go. I gotta get my kid. And to sometimes feel like I have to hide that part of myself or feel ashamed of it when people start to ask me too many questions. I mean, there was a point in time where I hid from coming to church because it was like, oh, what am I supposed to tell my kindergarten Bible class teacher when she sees me walk down the hall? Like, how do I drop this kid off on the children's hallway? Like, I'm the one who picks her up. I'm the one that drops her off. Who's going to sit next to me in church? Like, people will look at me a particular way. So it's just another one of those roles in society, but also in my church that I grew up in. And it's interesting.
I mentioned on a prior serial talk that I have done the exact opposite, Tyler. And well, part of it was because I couldn't hide it. I interviewed for my past 2 jobs very, very pregnant. Like literally, I went into labor the day after my last interview. So it was an obvious situation. But I even went as far as explaining, this is baby number 4. And it was almost like I wanted them to understand the whole person that they were getting if they hired me, because I am going to get the phone calls from the school, or the doctor's appointment is going to fall on me. Like, I'm going to have to balance my personal life and my work life. And I want you to understand what you're getting as an employer, because I'm going to need some understanding there from you also. So that's interesting to me, because I can only imagine how hard it must be to try to hide such a central aspect of who you are and what other kind of demands you have on your time from a potential employer. So the next question we were going to discuss, although I think we have it covered, was how gender roles have influenced your life since having children. If they have, how? Does anybody want to speak on that? Or should we move to the third question?
I was going to say something. Is it okay if I say something?
Yeah.
So I was just going to say, I think having a spouse who's a man, it plays out in real time, right? Like, and I think the most interesting thing we've learned is, because we try really hard as a couple to celebrate each other's interests, our passions, the things that we care about, give each other space to be the people that we are. That's really hard with 2 small people in our house, particularly during a pandemic. But we, being people who try to be intentional about that, it still is just there. The gap between your experiences, I think for the first time ever in our marriage, once we had a kid, it was like, we are having 2 totally different experiences right now. Like, whole way through marriage, just like, we both worked, we came home, we did our thing, and it was like cool. And now it's like the weekend comes and I'm like, yes, I've got help. And he's like, this is so hard. I want to go back to work. And I'm like, I'm having a break. And you're like, wow. So it's just like, and then just the assumptions of what you're responsible for. I mean, I could just get in a rabbit hole on this, but it's like the necessity to acknowledge that those things are there. That there is a very big difference, at least in our situation, of what we're experiencing from day to day, what parenting looks like for us right now. Keeping, like, acknowledging those things, keeping those things as part of the conversation, so that kind of everybody feels seen, heard. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. And I think if you don't acknowledge it, if you're not staying on top of it, resentment builds too, and I think that that's just something we've learned in the last almost 3 years, to, like, you got to stay on top of that, because the world's not really going to help you, and sometimes the church is not going to help you with sorting through those things, right?
In fact, it may actually work against you, right? It's like, oh, why is the dad at the park with these kids? Because mommy needs some time to just sit and look at the wall quietly. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah.
I totally get that. That's a conversation that we have to have repeatedly, because it is easy to fall under the assumption that mommy's going to handle that and that and that and that and that, and there's a reshifting, a rebalancing that kind of has to take place sometimes.
Well, and I think it also, and this goes a little bit down a rabbit hole, but I think it also then kind of translates to that next generation too, and how are they going to see themselves and see, that's kind of what we're really in the midst of right now, of making sure we're trying to be intentional about. I'm thinking back to like 2 weeks ago. We're doing, one of my boys does speech therapy, but we're doing it via Zoom. And so he's, on Zoom with his speech therapist, and he asks to play a specific game. And, like, he says these words and he gets to do things in this game. And the game he played fell into their, they have their games divided up by boy games, girl games, which I hate saying that just as it is. So I'm just describing the way they have it. It's against everything of my being. And I hear him say to his speech therapist, well, there aren't boy games and girl games. And I'm like, yes, okay, maybe we're getting through. Maybe he's starting to imagine that life means being who he is and not who society tells him he has to be. And so I think from a gender roles perspective, as you have kids, they're going to pick up on things based on how you're functioning or your family is functioning. And that's, to me, that's kind of what we're in the midst of. And that's almost as difficult as just navigating it between my spouse and I, is how do we then also create language and space? I've got one of my boys that loves to play Rapunzel. It's his favorite thing to play. He puts on my long wrap thing that I used to wrap him up as a baby in, and that's his hair. And I don't want him to feel bad about that, or like there's something wrong, because there are aspects of society that place judgment on him for playing in that imaginative way. And so I think that's kind of where we're at. And so that's why I think that gender roles conversation is important for us as adults to have. But it's also important as you move into the world of having kids, if you choose to move into the world of having kids, of being able to have that conversation around your kids in that same way, so they can be who they're envisioned of being, or who God created them to be.
I love that you said that, because I have a son who puts shirts and pants and whatever he can find on his head to pretend like it's hair regularly. So
clean shirts and clean pants.
which adds to the laundry, another conversation. Yeah.
I feel like I had a bunch of thoughts that have since escaped me, but just kind of going back to this conversation and these expectations, like leveling the expectations will only help everyone. And I actually kind of ended up down this rabbit hole and thought the other day of like, how did we get to the point where men were the breadwinners? Like, why was that something that's heavy to carry too, just the way, you know, female expectations are heavy, to feel like all that you are is a financial source for your family. That's all men have to offer, really. And taking out the trash and what else is, you know, stereotypically men?
Killing bugs.
Killing bugs or fixing the lights or the lamp or whatever that's broken around the house. You know, how did we get here? And, you know, how hard that must be to feel like your identity is wrapped up in something that's outside of your control. Because, I mean, you can control your career to a certain extent, but you're kind of at the mercy of the people ahead of you, right? And what they decide your worth is. And you have to kind of navigate through life trying to find a place that feels like your worth is the same as what you think your worth is. And that's heavy and hard and gross sometimes. So I just wish we could get to a place where that wasn't all that men had to be, or like macho or tough and like not having emotions or not wanting, like can't pretend like at work that they actually really want to go watch their daughter at ballet, you know, like just anyway. I just feel like we've said this 100 times, I've said this 100 times, I'm kind of on repeat at this point, but if we all can just be more of who we want to be and less of what is expected of us, male, female, whatever, like it just helps everyone. And I think, like Jennifer's talking about, it helps our next generation to live into what they are without the shedding of the expectations. And I think our next question is kind of into why should the church be talking about this? We've talked about this a little bit, and I think in prior episodes we've talked about how it hardly is ever intentionally rude. It is never typically from a place where, at least in my experience, people are trying to be mean to you or they're trying to make you feel bad. It's just kind of the impact of some of these good intentions. So, and that is just my experience. If you have not had a bad experience, please don't feel like you have to just come up with one. But what has life been like in the church atmosphere? Why should the church be talking about this? Why should the church care? How should the church be growing and changing in this space? Because I have a lot of thoughts and feelings, but I want to hear from y'all and your perspective. We talked about this a little bit in prior episodes, specifically around not being a mom. So, like from a mom's perspective, what do you want the church to know? What do we need to be talking about this as a church? What have your experiences been like as a church, or within the church that we should be addressing?
Where to start? I think this becomes easier, becomes more normalized as we see women using their gifts more in public ways. But I think that we theologically need to do the work of seeing God as mother. For a number of reasons. I think these things are so subtle, but the subtleties matter, right? So it's that motherhood is not just something that is highly loved or endorsed by God. go and be a mother, it's a good thing. It's something God does. And that is that's a shift. And I think, and not just the motherhood, but the parenthood aspect as well. And I think that subtlety is important because when we start talking about those different roles between men and women, this is slightly sidetracked, but we are both parents. Parenting looks different in different phases for everybody involved, but everybody is a parent and is parenting, right? With the roles might look different, they might change, the responsibilities might be changed, but both of those parents are equally important and valuable, right? One is not a side parent and the other one's the main parent. I'll table that. But we are going to have a more holistic view of the women around us in our lives, and their worth and who they are when we can see God as mother, when we can see that there's not just a space for mothers, but mothering is an important aspect of how we understand God. And that's challenging work, but I will tell you, and this is just where I'm at in my own journey right now. This has been a struggle for me, a very intense one over the last year. And until I could actually suddenly get an image in my head of God mothering, I had a very hard time connecting with God over the last year. When we sort of see like the real work is done in ministry, in the church, in these different capacities where we see it happening, motherhood is something kind of to the side of that, or something we do at home when we're away from it. All of that, it's important that that's seen, but it's important that it's important that we understand God through the aspect of parenting or the aspect of mothering. And two, I don't know how much sense I'm making, but two examples that might help. One of my favorite communion thoughts that has happened in North Atlanta, Charity Nybo gave maybe about a year ago. And she was talking about literally an example of like her two children working some things out between each other. But it was all through how she was parenting and how she was observing it. She's an amazing storyteller. She's and an amazing woman of God. But to hear that up front was a very beautiful and prime example of how God, how we understand God through these moments, through that parenting is, yes, not just something that we do as people of God, but something that God does. And another example, one of my dear friends and mentors, Amy Henniger, long story short, she is a phenomenal preacher, and minister in New York. And she had to preach a sermon one Sunday, and she has 5 children. And her youngest was attached to her the whole time she preached. And that's just how life had to happen that morning. And people probably had a lot of thoughts about whether that was appropriate or whether that was distracting. And I would argue we need more of that. We need more of, like, this is not something behind the scenes. This is something in the midst of how we understand who we are. It's something in the midst of how we understand the value that children have, that they are humans with thoughts and perspectives, and those are important. And how we're, how we're growing as people as we parent. I'm getting off, but all that said, like, as we're understanding that God is neither male nor female, but both and more, we can't just have this male image of God in our heads. And I don't know about all of you, but that part of that work I'm talking about that I'm having to do is that when I close my eyes, when I picture God, God is a man, help me. And I have to keep working at that to see more than that and connect more than that. And I think I just think in general that is a really vital piece for the church.
I guess for me, it's the image of how mothers are supposed to be. Like you're supposed to be this cookie cutter, sweet, I'm the hugger, I'm the cuddler, I do all of the things. And for me, I mean, I love, we have great days. We cuddle, we watch movies, we do all these fun things. But I'm also the okay, like we did that. I mean, Charlotte will write a schedule. What do we want to do on Saturday? And so I want to make hot chocolate and I like to watch a movie and I like to do this. And we have her schedule and I have my schedule. And it goes, well, this is what I want to do on Saturday. So we'll do your things and then I'm going to do one of my things and you can go play alone or you may go find your auntie or you can do whatever it is that you want to do over there. Because for me, as where I am a mother and I do love my child, I also have to have alone time or I will not be the best mother that I can be. So there's this image though. I mean, I've had people look at me like I'm insane when I tell them I don't always want to be with my kid. Like, and she can be by herself. Like, it's fine for me to not want to be cuddly, lovey, kissy all the time. Now, her father is the complete opposite. He won't leave her alone. Like, to the point where she's like, all right, dude, like, enough. Like, but that's his personality and that's his role and that's how he parents. And it's odd. People look at it like, what are you talking about? What do you mean you don't want to cuddle and do every bath time and read 1,000 books? And it's like, I love to do those things, but for me, is a time and a place. And if it's 3 and our schedule says this, then I need you to let me do a serial talk because it's time for you to go do what you do. Um, but in the church, that's not the role that the mom or the woman plays. The working and the organizing and the finances, that's the dad's role. And the mom is the cook, the playmate, the nurturer. Um, so I am fortunate that I have a situation where I get to share nurturing. But for the church, I just think that it's important to not make it seem like, I mean, I've literally had people ask me like, well, what's wrong? Like, are you sad? Is something the matter? And I'm like, well, no, nothing's the matter with me. Like, and I'm sure are many people who feel the way that I feel and force themselves to be this mother that they've been told they're supposed to be. Or maybe they had a mother who was like that and think that that's what they're supposed to do. Um, and so just to be more open about the different ways that motherhood looks, the different types of women that there are. Women are not just Bible, children's Bible class teachers, and they don't just work in the nursery. And, it's fine to have a baby strapped to you. I mean, I remember Jennifer had to bring, I forget, I think it was Lillian up on stage one day because that was the Sunday morning that it was. And we were doing, I believe we were doing communion that Sunday, the two of us. And she's like, I have Lillian. I was like, all right, like, cool. Like, obviously, like, you have 4 kids. One day you're going to need to have one of them. Like, that's just, there should be more of that. Like, we should, as a church, be open to the different, accepting women for who they are, and then nurturing them in how they are mothers. I mean, I'm not the same as Haley or Shauna or Jennifer or Sarah, so I can't be the same type of mother. Like, personalities are different. Our children's personalities are different. And that's also something that should be talked about. My kid loves to be with me. She also loves to be alone. She's an only child and she loves to have her time alone. Like, and that's also something that should be discussed, I think.
Okay, so I may be all over the place with this, and I'm going to pre-apologize if I am. I think it does. I think a little bit it starts with the church. A few of you have said already, and I know I've said before on a previous podcast, we've got to get out of our minds this image of God as male. God is neither male nor female. We ascribe this hierarchy to males and females based on this envisioning of God as male, and it hurts everybody as a whole. It hurts the church. You know, I still remember, and this has been years now, somebody telling me that she was sure she was going to hell because she had not had kids. Because you remember, there is that scripture in there that for the longest time, yeah, I see some blank looks. Yeah, 1 Timothy 2, maybe. It's in the New Testament, but about women having children. And there are some churches that are so legalistic that that was viewed as, if I don't have kids, then I will not go to heaven. And so that's some of the history of the church. And that has, whether we recognize it or not, has still permeated some of how we view gender within the church. You know, so I still remember the picture of Amy. I know Haley's friend Amy. I still remember the picture of Amy with baby strapped to her, preaching. And you know, and like Tyler said about me having to bring Lillian up there. And yes, it probably was Lillian, bless her sweetheart. But the thing is, if that had been, and I'm going to make a real blanket statement, if that had been a male doing that, nothing would have been thought twice about any of that. But there is almost this lesser than mentality associated with women, and then women who choose to become mothers. You know, it's kind of, and I hate to make those blanket statements, but I've been there, and I've spent my time kind of pushing back against that. I've had, and this was right after the triplets were born. So right after the triplets were born, I went back, they were born 2.5 months early. I went back to work 3 weeks after they were born and worked until they came home from the hospital. And then when they came home from the hospital, took 3 more weeks off, but that was it. And I still remember one Sunday, and I was working 13-hour days. There were some days that I would not see my kids at all, because I would leave the house, and especially Jack, is when the triplets were in the NICU still, but I would leave the house before he would get up, and then I would get home after he would go to bed. And then that would be repeated, just to try to be viewed as competent in doing my job, as being, you know, because automatically there was this kind of less than quality placed upon me. And I still remember one Sunday being there, and there was a person who had not liked a decision I had made. I had the support of my leadership with the decision, and he came in and ripped me up one side and down the other over that decision, and then asked the elders to decide when they were going to tell me to do my job and not just kind of sit back, since I had had kids, you know, not recognizing I was working and working and working. And so I say all of that, not to badmouth anybody, I promise, but to say we've got to be careful in the church of allowing some of these societal expectations that have long existed to dictate how we interact with each other, how we value each other. We've got to stop always thinking about, because whether we realize it or not, thinking about God as only male elevates this idea of the value of men over women. And until we're comfortable also viewing the feminine qualities of God as well, then we're going to struggle with this equality, this equity that exists between men and women. And so, yes, by having women up there serving more and being a present part of what is happening, that's definitely definitely one way. But I also want to encourage us to not just stop there, but to be very intentional about the language we use when describing what that looks like, when talking about that, when inviting people into that space. Because whether we realize it or not, we still create a hierarchy. And no matter how hard we try not to, we still do. It's the reason that when a female gets up there, I'm guessing, I know when I have gotten up there, I think long and hard about, well, what am I wearing? What am I saying? Am I going to be viewed as competent? And all of those things that simply by nature of my gender are what I come to question, rather than just go, okay, this is who God made me to be. I may stumble over my words. I may cry when I get up there. I may paint a picture that is way too wordy. But there is something in that somebody needs to hear that. And that's what God's created me to be. And so I know I am all over the place, and I apologize for that. But I think it's really, really, really important that this generation and future generations start to grow in this awareness of the supreme value of both men and women, and who God created each and every one of us to be, and not apologize for who you are or who you've been made to be, especially when that looks opposite to what society says it should look like.
Yeah, I wanted to add to like the hierarchy, like the difference, like when you're looking at an inclusive God, like, I think I mentioned before that women are not just Bible class teachers. And of course, I don't mean that as if that's not a place of value. I mean, I wouldn't be who I am had I not had a Bible class teacher, like someone who was patient with me from this small age and who taught me these things and who has the gift to do that. So it's not, but again, it's a hierarchy. It's well, this is the place, and then if you can get to here, then you're better. But then that particular place is typically for the males in your church. So when you have this inclusive God, you then can create an inclusive area where you have males and females who give into their gifts wherever those gifts lie, because all of those gifts are equal. You need all of those pieces in order to create this place and create people. And like we've kind of said in the past, like in order to create this generation that is leveled and inclusive and just look at each other and it's like, oh, I can do this and you can do that and we can do this together. Or, I like these dolls. I mean, we talked about one of your children loving Rapunzel, like wanting to dress up as Rapunzel. And it made me laugh because I have a brother who wanted dolls. Like, I had dolls and he was like, oh, I want dolls. She won't let me play with her dolls. Like, in actuality, he wanted something that size, but he's like, I want a doll. Like, what does it matter? But had he walked into the church with a doll in his hand, it would have been like, oh, why does he have a doll? As where I wanted Spider-Man. I wanted action figures. Like, I wanted roller skates with flames on them. And it was always like like, what's up with her? And I'm more vocal and assertive than my brother in certain aspects. But we both have played many roles in our church. And so I would like the gender or the generation behind us to take that even further. Like, I'd like to see my child, whether she wants to be up on a stage or whether she wants to teach in a class or whether she's admin or whatever it is that she does in that church, that it still be a reflection of God. And because that reflection of God is more broad than what it has been.
Okay, Tyler, you just so talked about the verse I was about to read. Okay, whether you realized it or not, it was the Holy Spirit. Okay, so this is one of my favorite versions of the Bible. It's called the Inclusive Bible, and what it does is it removes a lot of the gendered language that has naturally been translated and incorrectly translated over the years. And so this is Genesis 1, and I'm going to read 26 and 27. Then God said, "Let us make humankind in our image to be like us." Humankind was created as God's reflection. In the divine image, God created them. Female and male, God made them. God, I like that word, God's reflection, male and female. Human, God said, let us make humankind in our image. And that's the embodiment of both male and female. And that reflection has got to be present in all that we do, that reflection of both male and female.
I think from my perspective, the inclusion conversation kind of sparked this in my mind about, I think the Church of Christ, to my knowledge, is one of the few denominations that has Bible class. And that's a really unique way to get to know people. And it's been a really fruitful place for my growth. However, it's structured very siloed, and it's kind of around the idea of you are a child or you have a child. And there's not much room for other people anywhere else. I mean, you're welcome to join XYZ, but you probably won't find content for you. And I think that's very interesting, because I would argue the people reflected on this call don't necessarily have specifically a place for that would meet the criteria of the mothering or non-mothering expectations that we shared. And I think that is interesting, because we are a small sample size, but I think are more reflective of our congregation than maybe expected. And when you kind of just have specific boxes to just shuffle people through, that is inherently inclusive or exclusive, unintentionally, not the intention, but is the impact. And this will come up in additional conversations later in other serial talks. But, we have children's ministry into the youth group, young adults, we talk about this in a later episode, kind of, they're there, but they kind of are their own, like, over here, no one really knows them, kind of siloed. And then we go into, and now you have kids. And so then you funnel through, or you get to a point where now I have grandkids, and there's just so much more nuance in life than these kind of structured, graduated steps that you take through the Bible class system. And it kind of feels exclusive at time when you walk into a space that's not going to be for you. And then you have to try to find another place, or awkwardly like, well, I guess I'm just going to go to Starbucks. I don't really know what to do during Bible class now, because I don't know really where to go, what to do. And I've heard this from more than just, I think, me in this space. So I think that's something I would like to explore a bit, or have our church explore, is I recognize that there is benefit and value in being around people in your similar life stage, similar enough life stage, and obviously a need for a children's ministry and a youth group. Like, I'm not saying that we're going to blow the whole thing up, but there is also room for exclusion within that system. So how can we find a balance where I don't feel like I have to check all the boxes to be in community with this group of people, and when I feel like there are far more people that I don't know, just because I'm not in their similar life stage, that I feel like I could benefit from knowing. And something that's been really cool about these serial talks is getting to know people that are maybe outside of the walls of what I would normally be placed into Bible class with, or happen to run into them at big church and have the kind of nerve to like introduce myself out of nowhere. I'm just like, you're somebody I think I need to know. Hello. That's not something that's going to naturally happen on its own sometimes. So the opportunity to engage with other people, and I think maybe we had gotten into that before the pandemic hit, so maybe I'm not giving as much credit as I should, but the the structure has been something very limiting in my experience, especially post-marriage, but no children, and not always feeling like I have anything to offer to the conversation, which isn't true. But when the conversation is only around things I don't have experience with, there's not a whole lot I can do about that. And I can specifically remember showing up to somewhere and somebody sharing something, and I didn't know how to react because I didn't know if that was a good thing for a kid or a bad thing. They were sharing some sort of medical something. And so I just like sat quietly and like looked around and everyone like went, so I was like 5 seconds later, oh no, like, I didn't know what to say or do. And I need to like backtrack a bit because I was like judgmental, and it's not intended to be like you're a mom, so you should never talk about your children because I might feel excluded. That's not what I'm saying. But there are spaces where like spiritually, I mean, I understand that's a big part of your life and that's totally fine. But there has to be a balance of being able to include, because what if someone's trying and can't, or what if somebody just miscarried? Like it's not all on the table. So if we're more sensitive to more experiences and the people around us, then we inherently become more inclusive, rather than just assuming that everyone has the same experience as us and is in the same life stage as us and is handling life just as well as us. And I don't know that that's always fair to assume.
That's a really good point. And to Tyler's point, like to blend your points together, even though we are in the life stage of motherhood together, doesn't mean that we are reacting to motherhood the same way. And so if everybody in the class is laughing and happy and basking in the cuddly movie night, experience, and I'm like, I need my kids to get away from me for at least the next 2 days so I don't blow a blood vessel in my brain, then you can't contribute to that conversation without feeling like somebody's going to come to you and say, is something the matter? Are you depressed? Do you need to talk to someone? It's like, no, I'm a whole human, and part of my humanness needs to be extracted from these 8 pairs of hands that are always grabbing at me. So having more inclusivity and understanding that, we are all women, but we are not all mothers. We may be mothers, but we may not all be reacting to motherhood in the same way at the same time. And broadening those conversation topics, broadening the resources that you offer to people who participate in those classes, just being more, I guess, open in your thought process and how you deal with your lesson plans or deal with your event planning or your social event, just the whole gamut, thinking things through outside of your personal experience and trying to talk to different people more often so that you can meet the varying needs of the membership.
Well, and especially coming out of the pandemic, I have heard a few times there will be some moms, and it's okay if you are, who are just over the moon at the extra time with their children. And then other moms who feel so, I don't even know what the right word is, but disheartened by that perspective because they don't feel that way. And have come to me separately of just like, what am I doing wrong? Like I'm hanging on by a thread and they're living their best life. And both are okay, but I think there is, coming out of this pandemic, we're going to have to be very sensitive to not everyone kept their job through the pandemic. Not everyone thrived through the pandemic. Some people did really well during the pandemic. Some people enjoyed the family time. Some people's families barely made it through. So, or didn't. So, there's just so much more
Or
below the
both.
surface.
Tuesday and Wednesday, this was great. And then Thursday, I need somewhere to go. And it's not safe to go anywhere. Like I have been in both buckets during a single day, even sometimes. So yeah, it runs the gamut.
It's just being aware that your own experience is not everybody else's, and living out of that space, that everybody's experience is different.
I hope I'm not taking this like off, but kind of going on what we're talking about with church and how do we be inclusive for where everyone's at, how they might be feeling, you know, I will say one of the things that's been I've appreciated since I became a mom is I still have been asked to participate in things that I, you know, I don't know that it was like, oh, she's got a kid now, she probably doesn't want to do that. You know, I've still been asked. But what I will say about being asked, we have to think about what it takes for people in different situations to be able to contribute and participate in things, right? Sometimes that's gone well for me, sometimes it hasn't. And, you know, for a space that has been predominantly male-led, and influenced by culture's idea of how decision making happens, what efficiency looks like. You know, there's expectations in a room that's supposed to be full of adults talking about a topic and making decisions. And if you have to bring your kids sometimes, that's going to change that dynamic, people's expectations. It's going to be distracting. But you may have no choice. And, you know, I did have one situation. It was actually like around when we started the gender roles and leadership, the women's roles in leadership. We started facilitating those groups. Jonathan and I were both asked to be facilitators. And we had a 15-month-old kid. And there was just a Sunday where I was like, I guess my kid's coming to this. And she did. And she was not interested in sitting still. So I spent the entire meeting on the floor. Everyone was seated in a circle. I was on the floor with my kid, chasing her in and out of the room while people are talking, playing with her, letting her tear apart the diaper bag and put it back together and zip it and Velcro it. And I was like, you asked me to be here. And here I am. And I wish I could remember who said this, and I wouldn't call them out even if I did. But because it was a good thing. I'm sitting here the whole time going, oh, like, everyone is so annoyed I brought my kid to this meeting. And they might have been. I'm sure some people were annoyed. Somebody said at some point, you know, I love right now that Amina is in this room, like at this time where we're having this really big, important conversation, that like she's experiencing this right now. Like someone called out the fact that my daughter being in that room was why we were in that room, right? That this was important. And that the fact that she got to be present for this really important conversation was beautiful and amazing. And I'm going, oh, good, because this is a big hot mess for me. But those are the kinds of things we have to think about, not just in the moment, but ahead of time, right? We want everyone's voice in the room. We want everyone to feel valued. Like everyone keeps saying, like intentions are good, right? Like if we want those things, we have to do the work ahead of time to say, what does it look like? What does that look like? What does it look like for everyone to be able to show up and contribute? Not just ask them to show up, because the getting from here to the showing up is sometimes the hardest part for people. So can we do that work? Can we be at the forefront of culture and how we make space for mothers to participate? To not be so bothered, perhaps, that children are in the room. What does it look like to have a conversation with children in the room? I'm not saying that's always the best thing, but sometimes it's necessary, right? So it takes a lot of creativity and a lot of us being able to say how we've done things in the past works for a certain subset of people. But it's not inclusive. And it won't always work. And it won't always be a welcoming space unless we can rethink some things.
So do we want to do maybe just an opportunity to share any last thoughts? We have really covered a very wide range of topics in this conversation, but if there's anything else burning in your mind that you want to share with our viewers, now's the time to do it.
I can start. I think something's been challenging for me is kind of like the priority comparison. And we talked about this, I think, in the professionalism episode that you should go watch. Just about how if you don't have kids, you shouldn't feel like you have to then take on the weight of the world on behalf of people who do have kids. And this was specifically talking about at work. So, if people default to you at work by saying, well, you don't have kids, you don't have to leave by 3:30 or 4:30 or 5:30 or whatever time they need to leave, you can stay on late because you don't have kids, and just kind of pushing back on that. And I think that's true in church space. But my challenge is kind of, Haley, what you were saying is that just because I felt like in a space where I didn't have anything to share or no one cared about what I had to say because I wasn't a mom, just pushing back that that's not true. They still, like, people who have kids, people who don't have kids can be in deep community. And I don't want anyone to leave this conversation feeling like we are at odds or that I feel so negatively about people who have kids that I can't even stand them. Like, that is not the case. I think sometimes what it requires is my ability to kind of get over the hurdle of they still care about what I have to say. So it might be a little bit awkward to figure out, well, how do I basically hijack this conversation, go in a completely different direction, because I don't have kids, so I don't have anything to say about this part, but I do have this going on in my life, and they would want to know, to really kind of lean into that and just feel confident in their care and concern for you. If you don't have kids. And I think that's true for any space. Like, if you're in a space where you feel like the minority, or if you feel like you're not being represented, especially at church, I want there to be empowerment to make change, and not just a frustration, like, until they figure this out, I'm not going to engage. Because I don't think that, specifically our church, I will say, I think that there are people who deeply care, and just because their season of life is challenging, or your season of life is challenging, I think that there still is a deep need for community, and that can happen regardless of box or silo or life stage or high or low. If you're happy, you're allowed to feel happy. If you're sad, you're allowed to feel sad, and those people are allowed to coexist. If you're both, that's allowed to coexist too. So I don't know if this is making a ton of sense, but I just didn't want to leave this conversation with anyone feeling like anything that we represent is at odds with anything else. So I think that it is really important to feel as one, but the diversity, I think, is what is incredibly important, and recognizing that there are differences is really the only thing that I think is important. Just the acknowledgement that it's different, and people can be different, life stage is different, how mothers handle things are different, how married people don't have kids is different. Like, that's all okay. And I think that's the important part of community, right? Is acknowledging the differences.
I guess something that's been on my mind, or just something to put out there, is just to not feel like you're in a box. Like, you have to do everything this cookie cutter way, or any decisions that you've made are like life and career ending. And just for me, to be completely candid and vulnerable, I said before, like, I didn't want to ever be a mother. It just wasn't something that was on my radar. But at the absolute lowest point of life, I was given this little person that I had to care for and support and live for. And that wasn't something I felt like I wanted to do anymore. And so I have her, and I live for her, and I love her. But I do also feel like you have to not feel pressure to just be whoever it is that someone is telling you you have to be. And so that's just something that's very, very important. It's something that I had to learn. So just to wholeheartedly believe that male, female, adult, child, like just be, lean into the things and listen to God and just be who it is that you're wanting to be.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I think that, especially for our Catalyst members who are just starting off and just experiencing life on their own without parent involvement on a day-to-day basis, for the most part, figuring out who they are and who they're going to be. I think that that little nugget will really resonate with them.
I just want to, Tyler, that was beautiful. And I just want to echo like similar sentiment. Like I'm still at 36 doing the work of like listening to myself, you know, like what's true for me right now? What's the work? What's mine to do right now? And what isn't? And everyone else's choices aren't a commentary on yours. Feels that way sometimes, you know, like I think we're, because of expectations, because of cultural norms, because of traditions, et cetera, et cetera. But if we can honor ourselves, if we can listen to what the Holy Spirit's doing in us, and just learn to be bold in that, you know, that takes a lot of practice for me. All of our lives are going to look different from each other. That's good and right. It can feel lonely sometimes, but I think it doesn't have to. Like Shauna said, we still want to do life together, right? Like we don't have to be doing the same things to be in relationship with each other. And I just think that's really important.
And just how much we can learn from one another. Mm-hmm. You know, I can learn from people who are experiencing the same thing as me and who can like understand where I'm coming from. But my goodness, the different perspectives I get from my single friends and my older friends and my friends who are just starting out with life and have a fresh perspective on everything, that can only help me grow as a person.
Yeah, I agree with all that everybody has said. You know, the phrase that keeps coming to mind is this idea of, you know, we're called to unity, but unity isn't sameness. We're called to unity through our diversity, through the differences that we bring to the table. And we're called to live out who God has made us to be. And so I think that's what I would leave us with, is that just reminder of leaning into who you are as a reflection of who God is.
In a similar vein, and in the vein of inclusion, I just want to quickly acknowledge that this has been a conversation about binary gender, and that just is a reflection of who's on the call. And I just don't want to be dismissive of the fact that that's just who we are. And that does not necessarily mean that is representative of all of Catalyst or all of North Atlanta. So I just want to acknowledge that piece.
Well, this has been, once again, an amazing hour filled with a lot of, I think, thoughts that will, A, resonate with our membership, but also B, give us things that we can kind of chew on as we progress. You know, our lives are in stages now that will inevitably change as time goes on. And these conversations are things that we can reflect back on and use when we're feeling like we need an extra boost. So thank you, ladies, Haley, Tyler, and Jennifer. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. This was wonderful. We will be having a Zoom call on next Wednesday. at 9 o'clock to talk amongst ourselves, to dissect what we discussed on this call, and to talk more, ask questions, kind of dig a little deeper. So we invite our viewers to be a part of that call. Information will be posted in the Instagram link. I don't know what you say. What's the lingo?
Bio. The Instagram bio.
In the Instagram bio. And we look forward to that conversation with you all. And we look forward to seeing you next week when our topic will be a more general discussion about gender roles. Yeah, is that right? Okay. All right. So thank you everyone for watching. Thank you to our wonderful panelists for participating. We appreciate your time. We appreciate your vulnerability. You appreciate you sharing your insight. And we love you all and hope you have a great week and look forward to talking to you next week on Zoom. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.